Lamentations and Psalm 130. Psalm 130 expressed the stark grief of those who know the unimaginable loss and horror of war. Jesus lived in a conquered land, seething with resentment and political uncertainty. He and his people were surrounded by injustice, inequity, and violence. The Gospels themselves were written later, in the years after the total destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, an event which completely reshaped the world for both Judaism and the early Jewish Christian movement. So our Holy Scriptures aren't simplistic about the nature of life and faith, like I have been at times in my life. The Bible reflects deep awareness of the brokenness of the world, the impermanence of things, and the experience of loss and alienation. As we just heard, how lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. Out of the depths I cry to you, O God, hear my voice, let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. Or look, in the Gospels we see Jesus surrounded by crowds of hurting people, pressing in on him, seeking healing and wholeness for themselves and their world in a terrible time. I find it very helpful that our scriptures affirm the full reality of human experience and allow for grief, crushing despair, even anger, as honest expressions of a faithful life, right alongside joy, thanksgiving, and unforeseen hope. Those things are just as important. The ability to express our grief, despair, and even anger to God. The great Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann wrote, "The life of faith expressed in the Psalms is focused on two moves of faith that are always underway in our lives, which usually surprise us and which we regularly resist. One move is from a settled orientation, from our good days, into a season of disorientation that results from a dismantling of an old known world and a loss of confidence in God's good creation. This dismantling," Brueggemann wrote, "usually includes a rush of negativities in our lives, including rage, resentment, guilt, alienation, despair, even hatred and hostility." Was Brueggemann reading my mind lately? What's he up to? Many of the Psalms and the entire book of Lamentations are expressions of this movement in life, from settled orientation to profound disorientation. The fact that these writings are included in the Bible reflects an understanding that the experience of disorientation, that aspect of our lives, our bad days, can and should be addressed to God, brought to God, even if it's only in the form of bitter complaint, which the psalmists are pretty good at, if you read it carefully. All of us know this experience. We may not know the horror of war or conquest like so many others in our world. We may not know the uncertainty of an immigrant detention camp on the border or life on the street, but we know what it is to experience times of profound disorientation in our lives. Starting with the physical changes of adolescence to the first time you leave home. From the unexpected challenges of marriage to the trauma of divorce. From losing a job to losing a loved one, we know the sense of loss that comes when everything familiar falls away and even God seems absent. Meanwhile, beyond the changes we experience in our personal lives, we also live in an age of profound disorientation, like the Hebrews torn out of their homeland thousands of years ago. Like the early Christians trying to make sense of a new world without Jesus or Jerusalem. We live in a time of profound change, resulting from the dismantling of an old familiar world. We are surrounded by changes of all kinds. Globalization of the economy, growing inequity, climate change, mass movements of refugees and other people seeking a fresh start. All of these things contribute to a profound sense of uncertainty in the air for many people, so it's no surprise to look around our country or around the world and see, as Brueggemann puts it, a rush of negativities, including resentment, alienation, despair, even hatred and hostility. In many ways, it's a normal human response to so much change, but it can also cause great damage if it's not understood and recognized for what it is. When such times come, as they always do, we're not called to deny our feelings According to our scriptures, these are times for lament and grief and anger. But God, we are told, can hold our confusion and our despair, and we ought to hold it for one another as well.